I am Madison Carter. On Christmas Eve, I heard my husband congratulating another woman who was carrying his child. I didn't cry, I just felt cold. So cold it felt as if my heart had stopped beating. But that was also the night I began to live again, not to seek revenge, but to rise.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
My name is Madison Carter. I'm 34 years old. And what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. I still remember the taste of the winter air that night. Sharp, metallic, almost surgical. December 24th, Christmas Eve. The Turner estate shimmered in gold ribbon and pristine perfection. Not a single wreath out of place, not a single bulb flickering. It was like a stage set for a perfect holiday, scripted for a family that never truly existed. 8 years I'd spent rehearsing my lines in that house, smiling at dinners, toasting at fundraisers, pretending I didn't hear the way Julia called me efficient, like it was a slur. I stood outside the tall iron gates, holding a small navy blue box in one hand, a gift, simple but precious, and a bottle of champagne in the other. A Dom Perignon Ethan had once told me he'd save for the day we had a child. That bottle had gathered dust in our wine cellar for years. I had told myself it was waiting for the right moment, that maybe next year we'd be ready. I didn't know the moment had come, just not for me. The snow beneath my heels barely crunched. The world felt still, like it was holding its breath. And then I heard it. Through the door left ajar for arriving guests. Voices tumbled out. "We're going to be grandparents." Julia's voice rang like crystal, brittle and overly bright. My heart jerked. No, surely she didn't mean. "She doesn't know yet, right?" Ethan asked, nervous, too casual. "No, and she doesn't need to," Julia replied, sharper now. "This baby will finally align your life with what's meant to be." Julia is young, fertile. Madison was always too controlled, too professional. My entire body stilled. Pregnant. Julia, not me. They were talking about her. The assistant who wore silk blouses too sheer and smiles too wide. The one I'd hired, the one I'd trusted, the one who had now, apparently, become the future mother of my husband's child. The champagne slipped. It didn't crash, it exploded. Glass sang against stone, splashing gold liquid across the white entryway like a fallen crown. But no one came outside. No one noticed. Except me. I was frozen, not metaphorically. My entire body felt encased in ice. Not the pleasant kind of cold. No, this was visceral. It shot up my spine like a warning siren, my ears filled with the thunder of my own heartbeat. So loud, I was convinced even the heavens could hear it. My hands trembled, but I didn't cry. My tears stayed buried, locked behind a dam built from years of trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect Turner. I knelt slowly and set the box gently on the stone step. Inside was something Ethan would never notice missing, my father's compass. The only thing I'd kept from my childhood after the accident. It wasn't a gift for him, really. It was a breadcrumb, a marker. Something to prove to myself that I had been here, that I had tried. As I turned away, snow beginning to flurry around my face, one thought echoed over and over in my head, like a cracked lullaby. Who had I been living for these past 8 years? Betrayal doesn't always come with screaming. Sometimes it arrives softly. A single overheard sentence that tears the world apart. I didn't run that night. I simply walked away. I called a car under a name I hadn't used in a decade. Madison Carter. Not Turner, not his, just mine. The driver didn't ask questions. I sat in silence, the city bleeding Christmas lights past the windows like streaks of mockery. People were out shopping, laughing, loving, and I was a ghost. I ended up in a rented apartment across the river, a furnished one-bedroom that smelled of pine-scented air freshener and someone else's failed dreams. The couch was too firm, the bathroom tiles cracked, but no one there knew me. That was enough. For 3 days, I didn't speak. I didn't eat. I stared at the ceiling and wondered how long it would take for grief to feel less like drowning and more like silence. Ethan called. Dozens of times. My phone vibrated like a dying insect on the counter, relentless and useless. I watched his name light up again and again until it became meaningless. Just letters on a screen, detached from the man who used to kiss my shoulders in the morning and whisper about futures we'd never build. There was one night, the sixth night, maybe, I found myself on the floor with the prenup in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. I remembered the day Julia had insisted on it. "Just a formality, darling," she'd said, her tone sweet enough to poison. "Protecting what's ours." I had been too in love to argue. Now I reread those clauses like scripture, bitter, binding scripture. Especially the margin note from Julia, "We protect our own." I almost laughed. What a war cry. And here I was, the outsider, even after all these years. I thought about shredding it, burning it, sending it to a journalist, but instead I folded it carefully and slid it back into its envelope. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about freedom. The next morning, I searched for divorce lawyers, quiet ones, precise. I didn't need drama, I needed dignity. I wanted back the $30 million I had invested into Turner Technologies. My inheritance, my risk, my belief in Ethan's dream before anyone else did. I didn't want equity, I didn't want blood, I wanted severance. A clean one. No war, no courtroom spectacle, no front page mess, just truth. That was the first time I slept through the night since Christmas Eve. Grief is strange. It doesn't ask for permission, it just arrives. In dreams, in songs, in the scent of a cologne in a grocery store aisle. But healing? Healing starts when you choose yourself. One breath at a time. People think heartbreak is a detonation, fire and fury and screaming matches. But for me, it was something quieter. A gentle shift, a slow exhale, a decision to step out of the shadows and stop, waiting to be chosen. That night, Madison Turner died. But Madison Carter? She was just beginning. People say silence is peaceful. They're wrong. Silence is the loudest thing I've ever heard. It follows you. It presses into your skin like a second layer, heavy and damp. In the days after I walked away from the Turner estate, silence became my only companion, and sometimes my worst enemy. The apartment I'd rented under an alias, MC Donovan, a mix of childhood and legal, was tucked away above a forgotten flower shop in the Lower East Side. Peeling paint, creaky floors, a window that didn't quite shut. I could have afforded something grander, warmer, more secure, but I didn't want secure, I wanted invisible. The first thing I did when I got there was place my father's compass on the windowsill. North. Always find your north. For the first 3 days, I barely moved. I lay curled on the mattress, not a bed, just a mattress on the floor, in clothes that clung to me like regret. I didn't eat, I didn't shower. My body, once trained for power breakfasts and boardroom marathons, had surrendered. It no longer recognized the concept of productivity. My phone buzzed constantly. Ethan Turner, calling, over and over. I watched the name pop up like a flame that refused to die. Even in the downpour, on the 5th night, I finally turned the phone off. I started walking at night. Long, mindless walks. Past bodegas, closed cafes, empty playgrounds. I told myself I was clearing my head. The truth was, I couldn't bear to sit still. Stillness meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. I remembered the first night Ethan kissed me. He'd brought me black coffee at a pitch meeting, said my eyes looked like storms. I remembered the way he danced in the kitchen when he thought no one was watching. I remembered his warmth, the scent of bergamot and ambition. I remembered the moment I stopped being his partner and started being his accessory. Hook for this section. You can survive betrayal by forgetting the person who hurt you, but what if the person you have to forget is yourself? One night, I opened the safe I'd had delivered under alias. Inside were 3 things: the prenup contract, a vintage fountain pen from law school, and a bottle of aged scotch I was saving for a verdict that never came. I unfolded the prenup with trembling hands. The words blurred in places. Separate property, no spousal support, no claim to equity. The clauses echoed Julia's voice. We protect our own. I had signed it like a fool in love, not realizing I was agreeing to be temporary. The bitterness rose in me like bile. I wanted to destroy it. I wanted to burn the paper, send it to every reporter in the city. I wanted to draft an email to Turner Technologies, CC every board member, and attach proof of Ethan's affair. I had the receipts, I had the leverage, I had the motive, but instead of striking the match, I sat in that dim apartment, staring at the flickering candlelight and whispering to myself, "This isn't who you are, Madison." Because if I burned him, I'd stay tethered to him. If I fought to ruin him, I'd still be dancing to his rhythm. And I was tired, so tired, of living for someone else's beat. It was 3:16 a.m. when I made the decision. I opened my laptop, typed in, New York divorce attorney, high net worth, discretion required, and clicked send on an inquiry form. When I closed the screen, it felt like exhaling after years underwater. The next morning, I drank coffee that tasted like cardboard and walked to the library, not to read, just to be around paper, silence, and strangers who didn't know my name. I started writing again, in a journal I bought for $4 from a secondhand shop. The first entry read, Day 7, I am not broken, I am unbuilding. I stopped checking the news, but it found me anyway. My lawyer, a gentle woman named Ava Sloan, called after our first meeting. "You've been mentioned in page 6, she said, her tone clinical. I braced. Billionaire's wife vanishes, Madison Turner missing, or planning something? I laughed, dry and humorless. They always need a villain, she paused. You could be the architect instead. Those words stuck. Somewhere between day 11 and day 15, I stopped checking my phone altogether. I began to cook small meals. I played Nina Simone on vinyl. I started meditating, badly at first, then with less resentment. I even began returning messages, not to Ethan, but to myself. I'd written letters, dozens. Dear Madison, I know you miss him. I know you think this was your fault, but I also know you are not meant to be small. Every day I read one back. Some made me cry, most made me furious, but all of them made me real again. Around day 20, I returned to my old email address, the one with Carter in it, and drafted the message to Turner Technologies board, requesting a formal meeting to discuss capital withdrawal. I didn't need to explain myself, but I would make it clear. My exit would not be chaotic. It would be deliberate, strategic, like a queen removing her piece from the board, not out of defeat, but to reset the entire game. One night before the board meeting, I stood at the window with the compass in my hand. My fingers traced the letters engraved by my father's hand long ago. NCC. Never compromise character. It hit me then. I could forgive Ethan someday. Not for him, but for me. But I could never forgive myself if I became the kind of woman who tore people apart just to feel whole again. That's not strength. That's still being enslaved. The Madison who had once needed Ethan's approval, she was gone. The Madison who was about to walk into that boardroom, she was made of fire, clarity, and the kind of quiet conviction that men like Ethan never saw coming. They thought I was unraveling. What they didn't see was that I was stitching myself back together, thread by thread, breath by breath, choice by choice. I wasn't collapsing. I was preparing for the reveal. There's a certain silence in corporate boardrooms just before a storm breaks. It's not fear, it's calculation. A holding of breath, the careful readjustment of cufflinks, the checking of watches, the subtle shift in weight as men prepare to do what men have always done. Preserve power. I walked into that silence wearing navy blue. No black, no mourning, just precision. The Turner Technologies boardroom was floor-to-ceiling glass. Everything gleamed. The table, the view, the egos. I had designed it that way when Ethan and I first secured funding. It was meant to reflect transparency, strength, ambition. Now all I saw was my reflection, and I didn't flinch. There were 12 people at the table, including Ethan. His seat, predictably, was at the head. My seat had once been beside him. Today, I took the opposite end. No one said a word as I placed a slim leather folder on the table, sat down, and took a breath. The kind of breath you only take when you've already bled out everything else. Thank you for making time on short notice, I said. My voice was calm. It didn't shake. It didn't rise. Ethan leaned forward. He looked tired, ashen, thinner than before. His suit was pressed but not perfect. His jaw, once sharp with confidence, now clenched with a tension he couldn't quite mask. "Madison, you've been gone for weeks. I don't know what you're thinking." "I'm not here to talk about what I've been doing," I interrupted softly. "I'm here to talk about what I'm no longer willing to do." That got their attention. I opened the folder, pulled out 2 documents, and slid them forward. Their journey across the table sounded louder than it should have, like finality had a sound. "This is a legal notice of my intent to file for divorce, and this is a formal request for the return of the capital I invested in Turner Technologies, $30 million, initially contributed under separate ownership before our marriage." A beat. Then another. No one breathed. Even the AC seemed to pause. I looked directly at Ethan. "I am not asking for profits. I am not asking for future equity. I'm not here to dismantle what you've built. I'm simply taking back what was always mine." His mouth opened, but I held up a hand, not in anger, but in closure. "I don't want your name. I don't want a piece of this company. I just want my freedom, funded by my own damn money." Ethan's voice cracked through the stillness. "Madison, we can talk about this. Privately." I shook my head. "No more privacy. That's how things rot. In quiet rooms and buried truths." Across the table, I saw lips tighten, pens pause, midair, glances exchange. But no one dared interrupt. Not yet. Daniel Reeves sat 2 seats to my right. He didn't fidget, didn't check his phone, just sat with a gaze that didn't pry. It listened. I caught the flicker of respect in his expression, not for my composure, but for the precision in my detachment. It wasn't coldness, it was control. "You're giving up your stake in the company?" one board member asked, blinking like he hadn't heard me right. "Yes." "You understand that legally?" "Yes," I cut in, firmer now. "My lawyers have reviewed everything. I am entitled to reclaim my initial capital investment. I'm not asking for a cent more." I let the moment linger, let it sting. "And I'm doing this publicly because I want it on record. I am not destroying Turner Technologies. I am choosing not to be part of it." That stunned them more than any threat could. Because this wasn't fury, it was finality. Ethan's chair creaked as he stood halfway up, then sat back down. "You're walking away from everything we built." "We didn't build it," I replied. "I financed it. I supported it. I stayed silent when your mother questioned my value, and I compromised when you made decisions without me. But this empire, this narrative of power and success, it was never built with me in mind, just built on top of me." He blinked, but I kept going. "I was the scaffolding, Ethan, the foundation you stood on, but now I'm removing myself. And let me be clear, this isn't revenge. This is release." I could see it hit him. Not the money, that wasn't the loss. It was the tone, the lack of venom, the sheer unbearable absence of grief. I wasn't mourning him anymore, and for a man like Ethan Turner, that was unforgivable. Daniel finally spoke. "Miss Carter, if I may." "Please, call me Madison," I said, turning to him. The first time I had spoken my full maiden name in that room. Daniel nodded once. "I've been in this business a long time," he said, voice low and deliberate. "I've seen people come in with rage, with vengeance, with noise. But you walked in with clarity. That's rare," a few board members murmured. Ethan stiffened. Daniel continued, eyes still locked on mine. "Clarity is a powerful currency. If you ever find yourself looking for new ground to build on, call me." He slid a sleek matte black card across the table, the only sound in the room. I didn't take it, not yet, but I looked at it, and I nodded. That was enough. The meeting dissolved 15 minutes later. No shouting, no grandstanding, just paperwork, logistics, and stunned silence. The kind that follows a quiet revolution. As I walked to the elevator, I could feel their eyes follow me, not with judgment, but with something else. Awe, or maybe fear. Ethan caught up before I reached the doors. His steps were slower than they used to be, more careful. Like he knew every word mattered now. "Madison," he said, "you don't have to do this." I turned to him. Let him see me. All of me. "I already did," he swallowed. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I studied his face, the pleading behind the war. Pride, the remorse behind the rehearsed line. "I know," I replied. "That's the saddest part." He reached out, just a fraction, but I didn't move. "You still matter to me," he said. "You'll need to learn how to matter to yourself now." And with that, I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed between us, and for once, I didn't feel the ache of separation. I felt peace. That night, I walked the streets of Manhattan alone. My heels clicked against pavement like punctuation in a sentence only I understood. The air was brisk, but I wasn't cold. I stopped by the river, the same one I'd passed on my first night of disappearing. Only this time, I wasn't hiding. I was reclaiming. When I returned to my apartment, I lit a candle, poured a small glass of red wine, and opened my journal. Day 21. Today, I walked into a room full of men who once saw me as accessory, and left as my own authority. I underlined the word sovereignty 3 times. Then I turned off the lights, and slept without dreams. The day after the boardroom meeting, Manhattan looked different to me. Not because the city had changed, but because I had. I walked through it no longer as someone's wife, someone's shadow, someone's silent supporter. I walked through it as Madison Carter. There's a kind of weightlessness that follows a final decision, the way a limb feels just before it goes numb. You think it's freedom, but really, it's the beginning of feeling again. I spent the morning deleting Ethan's old emails. Drafts of proposals we wrote together, invitations to dinners with people I never wanted to impress, apologies, empty promises. They went into the digital void with a click that felt like exhaling. I was about to close my laptop when a new email slid in. Subject: an invitation to talk from Daniel Reeves. Simple, direct, no exclamation marks, no pretense. I opened it. Madison, yesterday I witnessed the rarest kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout. I'd like to discuss a possible collaboration if and when you're ready. My office is open. Or, if you prefer something quieter, I know a coffee shop in Tribeca that has the best scones and no photographers. Your move. Daniel, I met him the next day in Tribeca, a small, almost invisible cafe tucked between a yoga studio and a bookstore. No one looked twice when I walked in. I was grateful for that. Daniel was already there, seated by the window, nursing a black coffee like it held secrets. He stood when I arrived. That alone set him apart. No man in that boardroom, including my husband, had ever stood up for me. Madison, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for coming. Thank you for not pretending to know what I need, I replied. We sat. The scones were warm, crumbly, with just enough cinnamon to feel like comfort. We talked first about neutral things. Architecture, cities, books. He didn't ask about Ethan. I didn't offer. Eventually, he leaned forward. I've seen a lot of people fall apart when their personal life implodes, he said. They weaponize it. They bleed in boardrooms. But you? I bled in private, I finished. The boardroom was the stitch. He smiled. Exactly. Daniel Reeves was not what I expected. He wasn't flashy. He didn't name drop. His watch was expensive but worn. His shoes were scuffed. And he listened like someone who didn't need to prove anything. He told me about a new development venture, urban revitalization, sustainable design, community-focused structures. Nothing shiny for the sake of shine. No mega malls or ego towers. Just thoughtful spaces with long-term value. And he wanted me on the team. Not for branding, not to make a statement, but because of how I think. You didn't seek to destroy, he said. You sought clarity. That's the kind of mind I want to build with. I didn't give him an answer right away. Instead, I asked for time. To breathe. To think. To reclaim. He nodded. Good. A man in my position would be foolish not to wait for a woman who knows the value of her yes. That line stayed with me. That afternoon, I went home and sat with the offer. For years, I had been part of things simply because Ethan needed me. He needed my ideas, my money, my social graces. And I had given them, all of them, because I believed that's what love meant. But Daniel wasn't asking for devotion. He was offering respect. There's a difference. Later that week, I accepted the invitation, not just to the project, but to the version of myself that had long been waiting in the wings. The woman who wanted to build something of her own, not just fund someone else's empire. We began work in early February. The office wasn't a skyscraper. It was a converted loft in Soho, with too much light and not enough furniture, but it felt alive. We spent hours on zoning maps, sustainability models, historical overlays. Daniel treated me like an equal from day one. No grandstanding, no games, just partnership. What I noticed most was the quiet. Not the kind of silence that echoes with judgment or neglect, but the kind that makes room for thoughts, for breath, for growth. He never asked if I was okay. He let me decide when to speak. And when I did, he listened like my words had weight. The media didn't know what to do with it. Some outlets called it a rebound collaboration, others hinted at scandal. But we ignored them. That's the power of two people who don't owe the world an explanation. Daniel once said to me over coffee, "You're not what I expected." I laughed. Good. I've spent too many years being predictable. He tilted his head. Then let's build something unpredictable. We did. Our first proposal was for a community center in Harlem, affordable childcare on one floor, freelance co-working on another, a rooftop garden for therapy groups, and neighborhood dinners. It wasn't flashy, but it mattered. Every part of it was intentional, including my name on the blueprint. Madison Carter, no Turner, no hyphen, just me. There were still nights I couldn't sleep, nights when I replayed things I'd said to Ethan, things I'd tolerated, apologies I never should have made, but those nights grew fewer, softer. One evening, Daniel walked past my desk and said, "You seem lighter today." I didn't realize I was smiling. I guess I am. He didn't push, just nodded. Some end in quiet rooms with warm scones and a handshake that feels like being seen. I wasn't in love with Daniel Reeves. Not yet, but I respected him. And after all I'd been through, that respect was more intoxicating than any kind of love I had known. Because this time, it wasn't earned by sacrifice. It was offered freely. Healing doesn't begin with epiphanies. It starts with smaller things, like making your bed, like not skipping breakfast, like walking into your apartment and no longer hearing echoes of someone else's voice in the silence. By mid-February, I had stopped keeping count of the days since the divorce filing. Not because I didn't care, but because I no longer needed the number to remind me that I'd survived it. Daniel and I were working 12-hour days on the Harlem project. Zoning meetings, financial forecasting, site inspections that left my boots caked in dust, and my heart full for reasons I didn't yet know how to name. The office felt different than Turner Technologies ever did. There were no hierarchies built on ego, no meetings that existed just to prove someone belonged. Daniel and I worked side by side, challenging each other, building off each other's ideas. Sometimes we argued fiercely, but always about the work, never the worth. And when the day ended, he didn't expect me to smile. He expected me to rest. I started carrying a leather-bound journal everywhere, not for strategy notes or project lists, for thoughts, feelings, scribbles about nothing, fragments of the self I was still rediscovering. One entry read, "I used to think peace meant being untouched by chaos. Now I think peace is the ability to stand in the middle of it and remain intact. I no longer worked until I collapsed. I no longer drank caffeine like it was a coping mechanism. I had found a yoga class I liked, even if I still couldn't touch my toes. I made space for slow mornings and grocery lists, and the luxury of saying no. And for the first time in years, I stopped chasing productivity as a substitute for worth. Of course, peace doesn't mean the past disappears. The press had gotten hold of the divorce. Someone on the inside leaked just enough to hint at scandal. Ethan's affair, Julia's pregnancy, my quiet retreat. But the real headline? Madison Carter refuses profit in divorce, asks only for her freedom. I saw the article over morning coffee. My name in bold. My photo from some gala I barely remembered attending. I braced for the sting, but it never came. I just closed the browser, let them spin whatever story they wanted. I knew the truth. Meanwhile, Ethan was bleeding in the spotlight. Turner Technologies stock took a minor dip, but the media blow was harder. Investors were nervous. Shareholders began to whisper. Julia, who had once glowed like ambition incarnate, now looked pale and anxious in the rare paparazzi shots that surfaced. And Ethan? He started calling again. At first, once a week, then daily. I didn't answer. I didn't block him either. Because forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't about cutting people out. It was about deciding they no longer controlled the volume of your peace. He finally sent a message. Please, just 5 minutes. I need to talk. It's not about us. It's about everything falling apart. I read it 3 times before responding. Tomorrow, noon. 1 call. That's it. He called exactly on time. Old habits die hard. His voice was rougher than I remembered. Worn. The tone of a man who'd finally realized his worst mistake wasn't betrayal. It was assuming forgiveness meant rescue. Things are bad, he said. The board is rattled. Investors are pulling. Julia's talking about leaving. I didn't expect all this. You never do, I replied. A beat of silence. I need help, Madison. Another beat. You always knew how to steady the ship. I closed my eyes, because once, not long ago, that had been true. There was a time, 2 years into our marriage, when a deal nearly collapsed under scandal. Ethan had gone to pieces behind the scenes, pacing the hallways at 3 a.m., blaming himself, drowning in whiskey and self-doubt. I had written the investor memo. I had called every board member personally. I had stood in that boardroom while he hid in his office and salvaged his reputation with calm, calculated precision. He cried in my arms afterward. And I stayed. Because I thought that was love. Now I knew better. My answer was calm. Not cruel, just real. I'm not your savior, Ethan. I've forgiven you, but I won't rescue you. That's not my job anymore. I'm not asking you to come back. No, you're asking me to clean up a mess you made without me. Again. He didn't respond. So I added, find help, find strength, in yourself or in someone else, but not in me. He exhaled, sharp, bitter, broken. And I felt nothing. Not pleasure, not power, just release. After the call, I didn't shake, I didn't cry, but I sat with it. Let the old memories pass through like ghosts asking for attention. I gave them 5 minutes. Then I stood up, stretched, and returned to my sketch pad, the new layout for the community center's 2nd floor. There were lives to rebuild, and mine was only one of them. Daniel noticed the shift in me. You seem lighter, he said during a lunch break. I am. Did something good happen? I paused. Then smiled, real and small. I finally stopped mistaking closure for responsibility. He didn't ask questions, just passed me a coffee and raised a toast. To boundaries, he said. To peace, I replied. That night, I walked to the tiny balcony of my apartment, the one with a single potted lavender bush that never quite bloomed right, and looked out at the city. The skyline shimmered like something unbothered by opinion. I thought of all the times I had tried to be perfect, the wife, the strategist, the fixer. I thought of all the ways I had disappeared into someone else's storm, thinking if I could just calm the thunder, I'd finally earn my place. But storms were never mine to control. I was meant to weather them, and now I was finally building something where the sun could reach me. The lavender plant beside me caught a rare gust of warm air. Its petals trembled, still growing, still stubborn, still reaching toward the light. Just like me. Peace doesn't look like perfection. It looks like a woman standing alone on her balcony, breathing deeply, with no one to impress and nothing to fix. It looks like saying no without guilt. It looks like walking away from chaos, not because you're bitter, but because you're whole. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't healing because someone else broke me. I was healing because I finally chose myself. The first time I stood on the rooftop of the finished Aurora Community Center, it was raining. Not a storm. Just a soft, steady spring drizzle that turned the concrete silver and made the rooftop garden shimmer like something alive. I didn't mind the rain. I didn't rush to get inside. I just stood there, damp hair clinging to my forehead, watching children run beneath the awning below, their laughter echoing through the atrium like music. Volunteers handed out art supplies and books. A woman in her 50s, a former social worker, organized a shelf of donated clothes with quiet dignity. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't headline-worthy, but it mattered. And for the first time in my life, I felt the kind of joy that wasn't performative. The kind that didn't need a spotlight to exist. The Aurora district had once been a neglected pocket of the city. Cracked sidewalks, boarded-up storefronts, a neighborhood fading into forgettable margins, but Daniel saw possibility in it. And I saw something else: reflection. A place overlooked and underestimated. A place that, like me, had been written off before it had a chance to show what it could be. Now it pulsed with life, and part of that life had come from me. We had finished under budget, ahead of schedule, and without compromising on a single principle. It wasn't easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. But every late night, every zoning battle, every exhausting site visit, it all added up to something that would last longer than a headline or a scandal. The opening ceremony was modest, no press, just the people it was meant for. Local families, community leaders, and the kids who'd already claimed the art room as their own. Daniel gave a short speech. I didn't. Not because I had nothing to say, but because for once, I didn't need to say anything. The building spoke for me. After the ceremony, I walked home. Not to a penthouse, not to a brownstone with imported marble and a staff of 5. Just to my small sunlit apartment near the river. It had creaky floorboards and mismatched tiles. The closet door stuck sometimes, but it was mine, every inch. And on the narrow balcony, tucked beside a small cafe table, was a terracotta pot, and in it, a tiny shoot of something green. I had planted it weeks ago, a lavender geranium, the same kind my mother used to grow on the windowsill of our childhood home. It hadn't bloomed yet, but it was alive, and so was I. I sat beside it, my journal open on my lap, and wrote, Day 61. Growth is not loud, it's slow, stubborn, and often invisible. Until one day it just shows up in your hands. Daniel stopped by later that evening, not planned, not romantic, just 2 colleagues debriefing a win that meant more than profit. He brought tea, real loose leaf, not the bagged stuff, and a plant catalog he thought I'd enjoy. You're building quite the balcony jungle, he teased, eyeing my lone flower, with reverence instead of judgment. It's modest, I said, but mine. He nodded, then leaned on the railing, watching the city below as the sunset painted the skyline in soft pinks and bruised purples. It's strange, he said, how calm you've become. Most people, after what you went through, would still be fighting ghosts. I still have ghosts, I said. I've just stopped letting them own the lease. He smiled. I like how your mind works. There was a pause. Not awkward, just full. Of what I wasn't ready to name, but I didn't feel the need to fill it. We sipped tea, we shared silence. And that, somehow, was more intimate than any touch. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I made oatmeal from scratch. I watered the plant. I wore earrings for no reason at all. I walked into the Carter and Reeves office with a quiet sense of ownership. Not just over the name on the door, but over the woman who walked through it. And as I sat down at my desk, I noticed something small. My posture had changed. I was no longer bracing. I was standing. Later that week, Daniel and I presented the success metrics of the Aurora project to a group of private funders. Halfway through, one of them asked who designed the mentorship program for at-risk girls. That was Madison, Daniel said before I could speak. She doesn't just see buildings, she sees lives. And the way he said it, no condescension, no surprise, just fact, made something quiet settle in my chest. Not butterflies, roots. I still thought of Ethan sometimes. Not with pain, not with longing, just as a character from a book I had once loved too much and finally closed. I heard Julia had moved out of his condo, that she was staying with her sister in Boston, that the baby was due in the summer. I wished her well, genuinely, because now I understood something. Wishing someone well isn't about absolution, it's about liberation. Mine. One evening, I stood in front of my mirror and caught a glimpse of someone I hadn't seen in years. Not the polished wife with curated jewelry and perfect hair. Not the ghost woman who disappeared after betrayal, but me, messy, honest, whole. We talk about growth like it's a miracle, but sometimes, growth is just the refusal to stay buried. It's choosing a small apartment over a mansion if it means peace. It's planting something with your own hands, not to impress, but to remember who you are. It's standing in the rain on a rooftop you helped build and thinking, this is enough, and maybe even more than enough. Because for the first time, I wasn't chasing legacy to escape the past. I was building it to honor the future. We sipped tea, we shared silence, and that somehow was more intimate than any touch. Before he left, Daniel paused at the door, one hand resting lightly on the frame. "If you ever want help choosing what to plant next," he said. "I'm not terrible with soil," I smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." He lingered a moment longer, not as if unsure, but as if savoring a stillness too rare to rush. Then he nodded once, quiet and respectful, and disappeared down the hall. I closed the door gently behind him, not with longing, with gratitude. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I made oatmeal from scratch. I watered the plant, this time slowly, with care, letting my fingers press into the cool dirt. The scent of soil on my skin made me think of my mother's garden gloves, cracked and always too big for my hands. Sunlight spilled in sideways, catching the rim of the terracotta pot, and for a brief moment, it looked like the beginning of something sacred. I never thought I'd return to the Turner mansion. Not as a wife, not as a ghost, but as something entirely new. It began with a listing I didn't expect to see. A headline buried in a Thursday evening email from a real estate network I barely subscribe to anymore. Historic Hudson Estate up for sale. Private showing only. Attached were photos. I knew every angle, every corridor, every line of that facade. The Turner mansion, my former home, up for sale. I stared at the screen for a long while. I expected to feel rage, grief, maybe even temptation, but what I felt was something colder. Detached, curious, like when you see a photo of yourself from years ago and wonder who that woman was, and how she ever lived inside your skin. I didn't visit immediately. I sat with the idea for weeks. I ran it past Daniel one morning over coffee. "Buying back the house?" he asked gently, not judgmental, just interested. "Why?" I thought about it. Not to reclaim, not to rewrite, but to redeem. "Because it used to be a symbol of everything I lost," I said. "And I want to turn it into a place where other women find what I didn't have. Legal help, financial counsel, a safe place to begin again." He didn't blink. He just nodded, like he already knew that answer lived inside me all along. "You don't want revenge," he said. "No," I replied. "I want purpose." I visited the property alone. The front gates were rusted slightly, a detail that made me smile. Even wealth decays when left without care. Inside, the foyer was colder than I remembered. The chandelier was still there, that obscene cascade of crystal that had cost more than some people's annual salary. It used to impress me. Now it felt hollow. I walked the halls slowly, the piano room, the long dining table where Julia once corrected my posture during brunch, the parlor where Ethan kissed me the night we signed our first investment deal, the stairs I'd run up after overhearing things not meant for my ears. It wasn't pain that came back, it was perspective. And with each step, I reclaimed the space not through ownership, but through vision. By the time I reached the master bedroom, I had decided. The house wouldn't be restored to its former glory. It would be rebuilt into something better. A legal resource center, a shelter, a co-working space for women rebuilding their careers, post-divorce or post-abuse. A transitional housing program for mothers cut off financially. A place for those who had been told, "You're not enough without him." I hired architects and trauma-informed designers. We gutted the closet Julia had once mocked me in. We converted the wine cellar into a library full of books on financial literacy and healing from emotional abuse. The master suite became a wellness room. Natural light, soft chairs, windows that opened to the garden. We kept the bones of the house, but we changed its heart. Months passed, and finally, one crisp October afternoon, it was done. We called it the Carter House for Women. The plaque was simple, bronze, no fanfare. Inside, volunteers moved with purpose. Laughter echoed in the reading room. I watched a young woman in her 20s hold her toddler while speaking with a lawyer about custody rights. A middle-aged woman typed a resume on a laptop we'd donated. A teenager asked if she could start a poetry circle. It was working. It was alive. It was mine. And then, one evening near dusk, Ethan came. I knew he would. They always do. He didn't come through the front gate. He stood outside it, thin, tired, his hair longer, clothes looser. Not like a man fallen from grace, but like one waking up in a body he no longer recognized. He didn't buzz in, he just waited. I saw him through the window, and for a moment, the old part of me, the part trained to check on him, save him, soften, stirred. But I didn't move from fear, I moved from choice. I walked outside, through the gate, and stood in front of him. No glass between us, no staff, no power games. Just two people on opposite sides of a memory. His voice cracked first. "It's beautiful," I nodded. "It is." He looked down at the gravel. "I heard about what you've done here." Silence. "I came to... I don't even know why. I did. We always know." "I won't ask to come in," he said quickly. "I know I don't belong in there. I just..." He trailed off. I let him struggle, because some truths have to be spoken by the one who broke them. I ruined it all, didn't I? "No," I said gently. "You just revealed what was never built right." He winced. I didn't step back, but I didn't step forward either. "This house," I said quietly, "used to be a palace of control, of performance, of fear. Now it's something else." I took a breath. "It's no longer a monument to ego. It's a sanctuary for truth." He looked up at me, eyes glassy, mouth trembling. "I'm sorry, Madison." "I know." A long pause. Then I added, "But I built this so no woman ever has to wait at a gate like I did, waiting for someone inside to love her better." He nodded once, eyes filled with something that might have been regret. Or maybe relief that I wouldn't give him another chance to hurt me. "Goodbye," I said, and I meant it. Because this wasn't a cliffhanger, it was a period. That night, I stood in the garden alone. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the stone path. Wind rustled the new magnolia trees, the ones we'd planted where Julia once held her garden parties. I closed my eyes and let the silence wrap around me, not heavy, just honest. Closing reflection. Some homes break you, others remake you, and if you're lucky, if you fight hard enough, one day you return, not to reclaim the past, but to reimagine the future. The Turner Mansion was never mine, but the Carter House, it was born from pain, built on clarity, and opened with grace. It is not where I healed. It is where I chose to help others begin. It didn't come with roses, or orchestras, or a kneel. It came quietly, like most things that last. It came after a late client meeting, when the office lights had dimmed and the city beyond the windows hummed with soft traffic and lives we weren't part of. Daniel placed a mug of tea next to my laptop. "I want to build something permanent," he said, casually, like asking me to review a proposal draft. I looked up, blinking from the screen, half tired, half curious. "Another project?" He shook his head once, then smiled, a rare, private kind of smile. "No, with you." He didn't elaborate, didn't pressure, just let the weight of the words settle into the space between us, grounding and unafraid. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out at the skyline. My skyline now, not Ethan's. And thought about what permanence meant when you'd spent years rebuilding from rubble. Later that night, we walked by the river, hands close but not touching. "I never imagined getting married again," I said honestly. "I used to think it meant disappearing into someone else's life." "It can," he said, "if it's not done right." He paused. "But what if it's not about becoming someone's? What if it's just about walking side by side, fully ourselves?" That stopped me, not because I hadn't hoped for it, but because I'd never heard a man say it out loud. Hook. He didn't ask to complete me, he asked to walk beside me. "I'd say yes," I said, "but I need to do something first." He didn't look surprised. "Julia," he said. I nodded. "Not for closure, for clarity. I don't want to enter something new with anything left hanging in the old." He smiled. "I wouldn't expect anything less." I reached out to her the next morning. A short message. No blame, no fight. "Just coffee if you're open to it. For the sake of the child. And the future," she replied 2 hours later. Tuesday, 10 a.m., cafe near Copley. Please no press. We met in Boston. Gray sky. Soft rain. A quiet cafe with steamed windows and tired baristas. She wore no makeup. A loose gray sweater. Her stomach, round beneath the fabric, shifted as she sat. I brought 2 herbal teas. She looked surprised. You remembered. You hated coffee, I said. She nodded, exhaling. I thought you'd never want to see me again. I didn't, I said honestly. But time changes more than people think. We sipped in silence. The city moved on outside, oblivious. I don't expect forgiveness, she said eventually. And I'm not proud of how it happened. I'm not here to condemn you, I said. We both made choices. You were part of a mistake. But now you're about to become part of something more permanent than any affair. She looked down at her belly. Her hand rested there, protective, unsure. I slid a folder across the table. Inside is contact info for a lawyer, specializes in custody and parental rights, especially in high-pressure families. Also, a nonprofit that supports mothers during and after pregnancy, emotional support, financial literacy, childcare grants. She didn't move. I continued. I'm not doing this for Ethan. I'm doing it for the child. And for the version of you who got caught in a power dynamic you didn't know how to escape. She finally took the folder. Her hands trembled. I thought you'd destroy me, she whispered. I thought about it, I admitted. But destruction is just a way of staying tied to what hurt you. Her eyes filled. She didn't cry, but something in her softened. I don't know who I am without that house, that name. You get to decide, I said. We both did. Hook. Forgiveness isn't letting someone off the hook. It's letting yourself off the leash. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises. We just finished our tea. And when we parted ways on the sidewalk, I turned without looking back. Not from pride, but because I no longer needed her to complete my healing. She wasn't my chapter anymore. She was a footnote, a necessary one, but no longer central. I returned to New York lighter, not because anything had been resolved, but because I had refused to carry what wasn't mine anymore. Daniel met me at the office. I said nothing, just handed him my coat and walked to the desk where a slim box waited. No bow, no velvet, just a delicate ring, vintage, with a soft blue sapphire at the center. Not flashy, just intentional. Inside was a handwritten note. No rush, no pressure, just truth, and space to keep becoming. That night, we sat on my balcony, the geranium still stubborn in its second bloom, and I told him yes, not just to the proposal, to the life, to the possibility of building something new on land once scorched. The next morning, I updated my journal, day 127. I said yes, not because I need a new last name, but because I now know mine will never be lost again. We kept it quiet. No announcements, no ring selfies. Just a mutual agreement to show up, to keep building, to stay soft and brave in equal measure. Some nights we planned projects. Some nights we said nothing at all. But every night I knew, not by the way he looked at me, but by the way I felt around him. Steady, seen, safe. Hook. The best proposals don't ask you to change. They ask if you're ready to grow, together. A week later, I got a letter from Julia. Handwritten. Simple. I took your advice. I signed with the nonprofit. My sister's helping with the baby. His name will be Ezra. He'll never know what we were, only what we chose next. Thank you for not meeting pain with pain. I folded it gently and placed it inside the back of my journal, not because I needed it, but because it reminded me who I'd become. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper, steady hands, warm tea, and a willingness to wait. Sometimes it's knowing you could burn it all down and choosing instead to build, not for anyone else, but because you are finally someone worth building with and someone worth building for. It was a Thursday, mid-November. A soft drizzle painted the windows of my office with streaks of memory. I was alone that afternoon, working through city permit logistics for a new community center in Brooklyn. Daniel had stepped out for a meeting, and most of our staff had taken advantage of the rain to leave early. Silence wasn't rare in this building, but that day it carried a certain weight, like something was preparing to arrive. And then it did. A buzz at the reception desk, a name I hadn't heard in months. There's a Mr. Ethan Turner asking if you have 5 minutes. I didn't answer right away. My hand paused over the keyboard. My breath caught for one full beat. Then, send him up, I said softly, not because I owed him anything, but because I owed it to myself to hear the final note before closing the book. He stepped into my office like a man stepping into a place he no longer recognized. He looked smaller somehow, not just thinner, though he clearly was, but deflated, as though the air of entitlement that had once puffed him up had long since escaped. His eyes swept the room, the walls, the logo, the view, Carter and Reeves Development, etched in glass behind my desk. It wasn't just a name, it was proof of what I had built, of what I had reclaimed, of who I had become. "Nice space," he said, trying to sound casual. I didn't respond. He cleared his throat, shifted his weight. "I wasn't sure you'd see me." "I wasn't sure I would either." Silence. Then he stepped closer, not too close, and exhaled, like the words had waited too long in his chest. "I wanted to say something I should have said a long time ago." He looked me straight in the eye. "I didn't cheat because I fell in love with someone else," he said. "I cheated because I didn't feel like a man around you." I blinked, but he kept going. "You were smarter, sharper, you had the instincts I didn't. People listen to you more than they listen to me, even when you said it in fewer words. You walked into a room and changed the temperature." He swallowed, and I hated it, because it made me feel small, not because of you, but because I had never built anything that didn't have your hands in it. I said nothing, because it wasn't time for me to speak yet. I didn't know how to live in your light without feeling like I was disappearing. He looked down, fingers twisting together. "So I tried to dim it, distract myself, replace you with someone who wouldn't make me feel less." Another breath, shaky. "But it never worked, because even when you were gone, you were still the standard. Every boardroom felt colder without you. Every headline reminded me I'd traded legacy for ego." He looked up, and for the first time, I saw the thing behind his anger all those years. Fear. Not fear of me, fear of never being enough. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said quietly. "Not forgiveness, not closure. I know I don't deserve those." "You don't need to deserve forgiveness," I said. "You just need to stop repeating the things that made you need it in the first place." He blinked. "I'm not angry anymore, Ethan. Not because what you did wasn't cruel, but because I won't let your decisions define me any longer." I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city I now helped shape. Then I turned back to him. "You didn't destroy me," I said softly. "You freed me." His lip trembled. "You're not who you were," he whispered. "No," I said. "I'm who I always was. You just weren't ready to see her." He stepped back, nodding slowly. "I just wanted you to know," he said, "that I see it now." We stood in silence for a moment. A full circle carved not in grand gestures, but in quiet truths. And for the first time, I saw Ethan as a person. Not a villain, not a wound, but a man learning too late what he'd lost. "I hope you find peace," I said. "I hope you keep building," he replied. And then he left. No dramatic farewell. No request for one last chance. Just a man stepping back into the hallway of consequences. When the elevator doors closed behind him, I didn't collapse. I didn't cry. I didn't even exhale. Because this wasn't a release. It was a remembering of how far I'd come. I returned to my desk, my notes, my plans, and smiled. Not because the past had vanished, but because it had finally stopped echoing. That night, Daniel and I shared dinner in our kitchen. Jazz played low from the living room speaker. The smell of rosemary filled the space. He poured us each a glass of wine. I told him Ethan had come by. He didn't flinch, didn't press. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm done," I said. He reached for my hand across the table, warm and steady. "To new chapters," he said. "No," I replied, raising my glass. "To finally closing the old one." Some apologies arrived too late. Others arrived just in time, not to fix the story, but to mark its end. We don't always need closure from those who hurt us. Sometimes, the real closure is watching them walk away. And not needing to follow, because when you've rebuilt yourself from ashes, no ghost can hold you. And no confession can shake the foundation you've poured with your own hands. And then he left. No dramatic farewell, no request for one last chance. Just a man stepping back into the hallway of consequences. I didn't follow. I walked to the glass wall of the office, the one etched with my name, and placed a hand gently on it, not out of pride, but but reverence. This space used to belong to him, to his rules, his ego. Now it held purpose, shelters, community centers, jobs for women rebuilding lives like I had. This wasn't just an office anymore. It was legacy, wrapped in brick and blueprint. That night, while Daniel was washing dishes, I lingered in the doorway. "Thank you," I said suddenly. He glanced back. "For what?" "For never needing to be the hero." He dried his hands and walked toward me. "I never saw you as someone needing to be saved," he said. "Just someone finally standing where she belongs." He kissed my forehead, then turned off the lights. We didn't talk about Ethan again. We didn't need to. Because finally, I wasn't carrying him anymore. I was carrying only myself. The sky outside Carter House for Women glowed in muted amber, the kind of winter dusk that arrived early and lingered like a hush before a new chapter. Snowflakes drifted softly in slow, poetic descent, not in chaos but in ceremony. Inside, warmth radiated from walls once cold. Laughter floated from the kitchen where women, once strangers, now shared soup recipes and life stories. In the lounge, children played among wreaths and twinkling lights, their giggles soft as bells. It was Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the night my world cracked open. Exactly 1 year since I had placed a gift, and the last piece of myself, on the Turners' doorstep. Tonight, I would not stand outside. I would walk through the front door, not as someone seeking entry, but as someone who belonged. The ceremony was small, by design, no guest list for prestige, no press, just the people who had witnessed the quiet undoing, and now, the quiet rebuilding. Daniel stood beneath a canopy of winter roses and pine. The faintest snow clung to the window panes behind him, glowing in candlelight. He didn't look nervous. He looked sure, like a man who wasn't marrying a woman to complete her, but to walk beside her through every scar and every sunrise. I stood at the top of the grand staircase, the same one I had once descended as a guest in someone else's life. Now I was descending into my own. My dress was soft satin, unadorned, falling in graceful simplicity. No diamonds, no veil, just a necklace, a single charm shaped like a key. The one my mother gave me the day I left her home. "You'll use this one day," she had said, "not to unlock someone else's house, but your own." She was gone now, but somehow I felt her everywhere. Nora, one of the first women we'd housed here, handed me a small bouquet, eucalyptus, lavender, and a single white peony. "You look like someone who knows where she's going," she whispered. I smiled. "I finally do." As the doors opened and I began walking down the stairs, I saw them, Ethan and Julia, standing quietly near the back. They weren't there as symbols of guilt. They were there as symbols of what I had outgrown. I invited them not out of nostalgia, but because it mattered that they saw what they could never undo, and what they could never again define. Daniel's eyes didn't leave mine. He didn't smile with victory. He smiled with reverence. The ceremony was brief, vows exchanged like promises between architects, each line deliberate, designed to hold weight without sinking. We signed the partnership agreement for the Carter Reeves Foundation immediately after. No rings, just ink on paper that would build something more permanent than most marriages. Then came the moment that wasn't in the script, the part only I would speak. I stepped forward and took the mic. "My name is Madison Carter," I began. "And this house used to be the place I was most invisible in." Soft murmurs, stillness. I was once a woman who gave and gave, believing if I just gave enough, I would be chosen. I let the pause hang. I wasn't, and that broke me. A sharp inhale from somewhere near the back. But brokenness is not the end of the story. I scanned the crowd, faces of women who had once curled into couches here, numb with grief, children now safe, volunteers who had become like family. I stand here today not because I was saved, but because I finally stopped saving everyone else. Quiet affirmation. I don't forgive to excuse. I forgive to end the cycle. The pain ends with me. The room held its breath. Somewhere, a child laughed. Perfect punctuation. I turned slightly toward Ethan and Julia. My voice didn't falter. "This house is not a monument to pain. It's a blueprint for rebirth. You're standing in the evidence that something better can be built. They didn't cry, but Julia touched her growing belly protectively, and Ethan looked at the floor with a kind of reverence I never saw in our marriage. And that was enough. Daniel and I didn't kiss beneath the arch. Instead, we stood with the first blueprint of our next project: a community campus with transitional housing, financial coaching, and a legal clinic. The future mapped out on linen paper between us. Later, as the reception faded into quiet fireside conversations and half-finished cocoa, I wandered alone to the upstairs window. The snow had thickened. Outside, the city pulsed gently, distant sirens, muffled horns, life. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a worn journal. Entry: December 24th. 1 year later, I walked through the same door, but this time I carried no pain, only purpose. Daniel joined me. "We did it," he said. "No," I corrected. "We're just beginning." I pressed my forehead to the cold glass. "Do you ever wonder what they think when they look at me now?" I asked. He shrugged gently. "I hope they see a woman who stopped bleeding for people who never learned to heal themselves." I turned to him, and if they don't, he kissed my hand. "You see it. That's enough." Downstairs, a group of children had gathered near the tree, pointing at the top where a bright, glowing star now lit the room. Nora looked up at me, smiled, and nodded. A full-circle moment. I never changed my name, but I added to it: Madison Carter Reeves. Not because I was owned, but because I was whole enough to share it. Closing reflection. Some women write their legacy in ink, some in stone. I wrote mine in light, in the women who walk into Carter House afraid and leave with keys in hand, in the children who grow up seeing mothers stand taller, not quieter, and in the quiet vow I made to myself 1 year ago: I will never again stay where I'm not seen. That promise, it saved my life. And now, it might just save someone else's. There are pains that don't need to be screamed to be acknowledged. There are revenges that require no flames, no blades, only one door closing and another one opened by your own hand. Madison didn't destroy anyone. She simply chose to stop destroying herself for others. And from there, she built a new world. One where women are allowed to believe they deserve more than silent suffering. This story isn't about retaliation. It's about liberation, because sometimes the bravest act isn't standing up to fight, but standing up to walk away.